Good morning, Electriculture Safety Line Team. Welcome to another Lineman Safety National Webinar. This is going to be Miss Pam Tompkins. I'm sure several of you have heard her before and have her recordings. You are in for a really good treat here for today. This is a topic, we'll go over that in just a minute, but this is a topic that it actually has been missing from all the safety webinars. And so I'm real excited for her to bring this to you today. Real quick, Electriculture Safety, we have now 15,000 plus partners throughout America and Canada and a little international. It's amazing, just over 3 years, what you all are doing and how we are working together as a line team, fostering a line team throughout this country. It is amazing what is going on and taking place. When I travel, I hear all kinds of great news. And so contact me, Brent, at bierermeters.com. If you are missing the episodes, we'll have, after this week, we'll have 73, 74. And you can check them out. Go to bierermeters.com. Bierer Meters YouTube channel, and go through the playlist. Electriculture Safety, Lineman Safety National Webinars, promos. Go through the playlist, pick and choose. And let me know, and I'll send them to you. There's no cost. Miss Pam Tompkins, her company, sponsors her. She's the CEO and president. She comes here, so she pays for it out of her own company's pocket, basically her own pocket, and then we pay for it as well, and we share all these with you at no cost whatsoever. So check it out. I'm going to read you guys real quick about Set Solutions. Set Solutions, including Mr. Matt Edmonds, he'll be here tomorrow. That group, Miss Pam's company, they are amazing, and they go all over the country and do training and consulting. But I want to read you a little description on Miss Pam's company. Set Solutions LLC is a safety, training, and organizational assessment consulting firm headquartered in Lexington, South Carolina. Beautiful day here today, by the way. Specializing in electrical power. The company has been in business since October 2000, has helped electric utilities and their contractors throughout the U.S. manage safety issues through development, implementation, and execution of effective safety management systems. Set Solutions began because of a genuine concern for the safety of individuals and a fervent belief in the benefits of workplace awareness and training. The company's core values include dedication to innovation and excellence in regards to worker safety initiatives, along with an honest commitment to always do the right thing, never hesitating to protect human life first. Set Solution is further dedicated to providing organizations with appropriate tools and support to build and manage a sustainable safety system. And I personally had heard Miss Pam's stories and Mr. Matt's stories of them traveling and their training and what's going on in different parts of the country, different organizations, and there's a great passion there. So you're in for a treat. Last month, Miss Pam was also here, and she talked about a topic that you all should get, and that is reducing arc flash hazards through the use of effective controls. That is a really good one, and I was just like, man, Pam, because I haven't heard her talk a lot of technical, but she did an excellent job. And today I think you're going to be pretty excited about this. The topic, as you all know now, is lockout, tagout, and de-energizing lines and equipment for employee protection. This is a good one, and this is a must-have regardless, and please share as well. And Miss Pam, thank you so much for coming out here and sharing your expertise and knowledge. Yeah, and you all pay attention. Listen to her. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. It's always so wonderful to be able to come and talk. And you know, this particular topic, I have so much passion about it. And I'm going to tell you at the front end, I'll tell you at the back end, how important it is. If you have any questions, please get in touch with me, and I'll do my best to help you with this. I have several clients right now that are getting some of these great initiatives off the ground. And I was just telling Brent how exciting it is. It changes the dynamic of your whole organization when you have a solid, either what you call lockout, tagout, or something maybe called switching and tagging, or something called de-energizing lines and equipment for employee protection. So when you've got a solid program, you're going to save lives. Today, I brought some objectives to the table. Hopefully, we'll be able to not get so much technical and in the weeds and regulatory, but I do want to at least give you a baseline on what is required, and then let's just talk about some of the ways that you get this implemented. So we're going to start out with the purpose, why we even are here talking about this today. And then we're going to move into, because there are a lot of issues in our industry that folks don't understand the difference between lockout tagout in a generation facility and lockout tagout on a T&D lines. Now, I will say this, most of this program, the majority, we're going to be talking about transmission distribution. So I will talk a little bit about generation, but I want to set the stage and I want to talk about this, what I would call a line of demarcation between those two lockout programs. Now, I always like to start, and with any client, just let's get the fundamentals of this. What is the purpose of lockout tagout? So when you talk about lockout tagout, you know, it's all over. You know that OSHA has requirements for lockout tagout. But I want to set the stage for that. I've got a real basic slide that talks about this, and at the very bottom of this, I'm going to hit this home. Lockout tagout is just a process of checks and balances. Somebody did this, somebody verified. We have concurrent verification in human performance initiatives, and basically that's what we're doing. Plus we're adding flagging situations with that, and you'll find that in lockout tagout. But it is a situation where I'm doing this, somebody's verifying, somebody's doing this. And if you don't have a methodic process in place for that, then I would say after this presentation, please think about, do I have something in place that's really going to give me those checks and balances I need in this program? Now, the main purpose is, of course, somebody is going to be working behind a system that has been taken out of service, and we want to know that there's not going to be any unexpected energization. Now, when we talk about lockout tagout, we talk about a lot of energy sources. Okay, it's not just electrical. So I've got a list of energy sources. And I really want to make sure that we talk about this, because certainly I put electrical at the top, but there's mechanical, there's hydraulic, pneumatic, chemical, thermal, stored or residual energy. And in all of the processes that we have in electric power, we have most of these. Now, having said that, I'm going to say this today. We're going to focus on the electrical side of that, but I don't want you to forget that you do have all these types of energy sources that you have to deal with. So this presentation is going to focus around electrical, but don't forget these other energy sources. Now, I do want to talk about just the concept of lockout tagout. And you see that I have something here that says LOTO. So LOTO typically is lockout tagout, okay? I have two different things that I normally talk about in electric power. We have something called a traditional lockout tagout that you might see, okay? Traditional is definitely something where you have equipment that is what I call static. That means it's here today, it's there tomorrow, it's there 6 months from now, it's there a year from now. The only way that equipment is really going to change is if we have a major plant shutdown and we actually physically change the equipment, okay? The next thing is in a traditional lockout tagout, typically what you're going to find is you're going to find systems, I said switches here, but you're going to find systems that are designed for lockout tagout, okay? So it's much more in a locks, everything looks more traditional in a lockout tagout process. Now, let's look at the other side of this, because transmission distribution does not look like that. And this is where the difference in lockout tagout is. In a transmission distribution world, we constantly have equipment that has source and load changes. So somebody can be working on a system today and the configuration of that system, and tomorrow, because there was a bad storm that night, we can have a different configuration of that system. So things are constantly changing in the transmission distribution world. And when you're thinking about lockout tagout, traditional does not work because it's not static. That is the major piece of this. Also, in the world that we live in transmission distribution, all of you know this, a switch does not look like a switch. And I've got a list that's going to show us about some of these switches here in just a few minutes. But a switch doesn't look like it. So if I've got a hard jumper, I need to call that a switch. Something that's going to change the integrity of that system. And we're going to spend some time talking about that. Now, what I do want to do is I do want to take just a few minutes and talk to the folks that are on the line that are in generation. Because a lot of times we kind of miss that and we're talking more about transmission distribution. I want to give generation folks just a small amount of information here. So I want to highlight this. In the generation world, believe it or not, you have, if you go into OSHA standards, you will find that you have a lockout tagout standard for the electrical side of the house. And that lockout tagout standard is going to be found in 1910 269D. That is going to be called lockout tagout. Now, for all you transmission and distribution folks on the line, if you want to go out and look at that standard, I want to make sure you know it does not apply to you. It only applies to the generation folks that are on the call. Now, in that process, there are one other thing that I need to say, and this gets kind of techie, so bear with me. There are like 4 different lockout tagout standards in OSHA. It can be extremely confusing. On the generation side, I want you to stay with 1910 269D. And I also want you to think about every place else in your utility that has lighting systems and that has just normal maintenance systems on buildings. They are going to fall into this bottom one, which is 1910 subpart S, electrical. Now, if you have any questions on that, I'm not going to spend any more time, but if you have any questions on that, call me, because that can be confusing if you're a regulatory person. For everybody else on the line, you don't even have to worry about it, okay? Because we're gonna make it as simple as we can. Now, in the generation world, there are very specific procedural processes that generation folks have to deal with. You know, shutdowns of the system, it kind of starts with this. Equipment, how you're going to shut that equipment down. You're going to have a very methodic process. You're going to have all of your equipment that's going to have procedures for that individual equipment, okay? You're going to have training requirements. You're going to have verification requirements. You're going to have inspection requirements. You're going to have a lot of stuff that goes along with lockout, tagout, okay? So in the generation world, I want to spend some time now talking about the T&D world. I said it looks different, so let's look. You just saw the list of things that are required for generation. In the transmission distribution world, there are a lot of things. Now, the first thing you're going to see on this slide is you're going to see something here that's called de-energizing lines for and equipment for employee protection. That's what Lockout Tagout is called in OSHA and the National Electrical Safety Code. It's not called Lockout Tagout. Now, honestly, I could care less if you call it Lockout Tagout, as long as you understand kind of the requirements for that. And I'll tell you a fun story. So years ago in my utility, when I was in my utility, I was on a statewide committee that the group put together, and we're going to build out a Lockout Tagout for our transmission distribution group. And so all of us, we had engineers on our committee, we had safety folks on our committee, we had operational folks, and we would meet on a regular basis to build this out. I'm just going to tell you, we built out a transmission distribution program based on a generation facility. We put it out and everybody says, how in the world do we make this work? This doesn't, everybody said, well, this is what OSHA said, this is what you had to do. And honestly, I was one of those people. And boy, was that a learning experience, because we're not going to look like that. I've kind of given you the OSHA standard here to look at, so if all of you folks that want to look at the OSHA standard. Now, one of the things that typically I see is folks, maybe they call it Lockout Tagout, or they may call it switching and tagging programs. So they may add some other things into it. If you work for a large utility, you probably have a very methodic process that has years and years and years of legacy, okay? I will tell you that's a good thing, or it could be a bad thing. Your legacy might not be exactly where it needs to be. For you that are in smaller utilities or contractors working for smaller utilities, this program may not have all the pieces and parts that need to be there. I don't know how else to say that. So let's talk about what the pieces and parts are. We're going to start out with this list. It looks nothing like what you saw the generation list look like, right? I mean, there's a lot of things on this list, but it doesn't resemble it at all. So I want to spend a few minutes just kind of talking through what this is, what this looks like, how the application of all this works, because that's a very important part. I start out with the system operator. Now, a system operator, a lot of you know exactly what a system operator is. They operate your system. But here's what I want to make sure everybody understands. In the days of automation that we have now in our systems, that operator is able to gain information about what's happening on the system, hold that information, and be able to share that information. So if there were load changes, or if there were source changes overnight, there was something happening overnight, then that system operator is going to know that information, hopefully, if you have a staunch process of checks and balances. They would know that information, be able to share that information with the folks that are actually out working. Okay, so that system operator has information that's important. That's a very important piece. And that system operator controls what's happening on your system. Who comes on the system? They are looking at AVLs, they're looking at people, how they're moving around the systems, so they know where folks are. They have a lot of information. That's how they can control the system. Now, we work for really small utilities that don't have system operators. And you may work for a utility that doesn't have a system operator, but the concept of this is real important. I always say that OSHA standards, there's always a reason that OSHA even wrote a standard, and it started with a hazard. So always identify the hazard when you don't have somebody in that place. Like, the hazards are enormous, you know, electrical hazards, But the risk for that hazard is going to really raise when people don't know or they don't have the information they need. So years ago, I was working with a small utility and they said, there's no way we can do this. We have 2 line crews. How in the world are we going to do it? And I said, well, you got a whiteboard right here. Everybody comes in. This is where they come in every day. So as changes are made on the system, use the whiteboard. Use some way to communicate to folks. All right, so that's a very important piece, that the system operator, even though you may not have that name at your utility, understanding the function of what that person is or what that entity is extremely important. Now, there was a word that was used there because that system operator is going to give a clearance to folks to come on to a system to work. So I want to make sure I talk about the word clearance. It's very misused in the industry. So when you think about the word clearance, clearance is this. I'm gonna just start with it. It's the red one because it is a clearance for work. If a system operator is giving you a clearance, they're giving you an authorization to come in now and to work on this system and to ensure that the system is cleared for the protection of employees. That's what the word clearance means. I know that utilities across the United States may have a little different definition of clearance, but at the end of the day, that's the definition that hopefully we're all striving for. The word clearance up here is utilized, and it's used in the National Electrical Safety Code. That's why the code doesn't even use the bottom one in there when they're talking about switching and tagging and all these things. You won't see that word used because they're using the top one all the time to talk about, hey, I've got clearance for that distribution line over that roadway. I've got that air gap there, okay? So I want to make sure that that word is understood because that's an important one. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the word clearance, because a clearance should always indicate that somebody's cleared the lines. It should indicate that now I have de-energized and I'm grounding this system so that I can have people working behind this system safely. So that working behind this system safely is what I call a zone of protection, okay? So what is that zone of protection? It really is the boundary of this clearance, and that everybody knows that this is my boundary. I have these clearance points. I don't go outside of that. And it is an extremely important piece to this process. I would urge you to think about that zone of protection for folks and how you implement that within your programs. Now, clearance points, I've used clearance order, and I've used, actually I haven't, but clearance order is the zone of protection. Clearance points also is where that zone of protection kind of outlines there. Very important piece to this. Now, also, to be able to have somebody come onto a line and perform work, that person has to be, as it said earlier, they have to be given that control through that system operator. Now, they become what we call in the industry the clearance holder. They're holding this clearance, and they have responsibility for everybody that's working under them. Very important piece. Some folks call them different names. The industry as a whole calls these folks the clearance holder. They are responsible for the zone of protection. Everything that's happening in that zone of protection, they have responsibility for. Now, there's 2 ways that this can happen. There could be multiple people working in this area. They can, in the best way, especially in the distribution world, you're going to see this more in the distribution world than in the transmission world. Distribution world, most likely, the crews that are working in that area are all going to be working under one clearance holder who's going to have the knowledge about everything that's going on in that work area. Now, if that does not occur, and a lot of times in the transmission world it's going to be a little different, multiple crews could be working in, but everybody would hold their own zone of protection. They would have their own clearance processes. And I would say that this is extremely important. If you're using this without a system operator, this one's going to be a tough one to be able to manage and control. All right, let's talk about now protecting employees. This is just some words, but I pulled out 3 words in here because what they're basically telling me is that if I'm going to protect an employee, I've got to go through all switches, disconnectors, jumpers, taps, and everything else that's out there, through all other known sources. And I have to do what? I have to open them and tag them. So I want to talk about switches, I want to talk about opening, and I want to talk about tagging. We're also going to be talking about several other things that go along with this process, but I'm going to highlight these 3 things to talk with first. Switches. Believe it or not, there are many utilities that when they see the word switch, they think of a gang-operated switch. That's what switching is to them. I would urge you to think beyond that, because switching is anything, or a switch is, and I've got a list of things here. There are a couple things on here that I definitely want to talk about, and that's a cutout, a hotline clamp, an elbow on an underground URD. All these things definitely are switches, because what I'm doing is I'm opening, closing, or changing the connection of the electrical circuit. So it's much more than gang-operated switching. Any type of switch that would fall into here, and you may have a list of a lot more than this in your organization, are considered a switch. So we start with that. Now, you also in our industry have automatic and remote control switches. And you can just think through the dynamic of that, self-healing, automation, all the things that are in our world today. There are some very staunch requirements that have to happen with these types of switches. Certainly tagging at the point of control, and then ensuring that they are rendered inoperable. There's a lot that goes along with automation, but I wanted to make sure I threw that one in there for you. Now, I had another word. That word was opened. And you can see I've kind of highlighted it here, opened and isolated. So to talk about opening, I just want to give you a process of what may be obtaining a clearance. When you get to the end of this, now you're in that cleared zone. I will say that some utilities might have in a little different order than this with the tags. All the other things go just like this, but the tags might be in a little different order, and that's an okay thing wherever you have those tags, but the tagging process is a visual indicator and it has to be there. So we start out with identifying. Just identifying, I got to know all the sources that are there. In power, you have multiple potential for sources. Identifying them, and then I've got to go through the de-energization process, and what we always want to see in the transmission distribution world is we want to see something that's got almost like what that first word of clearance was. We want to see air. That's all I can say. We want to see air. And we want to know that that air is going to isolate us well enough and protect us. I say to utilities that have equipment that they can't see air, they need very methodic procedures on what it's going to look like and how it's going to be handled. Okay? And even in the air world, we need very methodic processes. You know, people think of differences and the way cutouts look and all kinds of things. So you need to have a very methodic process on what air is going to look like. Then we want to go through the verification process with this. Verification is, I can't even tell you how important it is. There's been some very serious incidents that have occurred because people performed a switching operation and they assumed that the switching operation did what it needed to do. I can tell you multiple situations that occurred where people have been injured, extremely injured. So verification, you're on underground, you're on overhead, you're on a transmission, whatever you're on, if you have a switching operation, you've got to verify that the switch is in the position that you had switched it to. You know, certainly in the de-energizing world, you're opening, but I also say that on the closing side of it too, that this is all working. Now, tagging, we're going to talk about tags here in just a few minutes, but tags are a very important piece. Testing. I want to make sure that I actually physically test, and that's where Bierer Meters comes in. You know, that the test that we're utilizing is the right equipment for what we're trying to do. And by the way, I'll give Bierer Meters a plug for this, because they have been the leaders in coming up with ways to verify all these things through the years. And grounds, we're going to talk about, is the appropriate application of the grounding process. Has to be there. So that's kind of the step-by-step process of all this has to occur. Remember, in generation we had a list, but now this list looks much different than the generation world. So here's my testing. So utilizing the appropriate test tools for what I'm trying to accomplish. And the industry is notorious for not doing that. Using inappropriate tools that may be giving them false, whatever, I say readings, but giving them false hope, I think is the right word for that. And tagging, I want to spend a few minutes talking about tags. It doesn't matter if you have one line crew or if you have thousands of line crews. Tags are a must. Tags are required. Tags give you, I'll say it's just a minimum requirement, but you can do so much in the tagging world. So here's what is a very important piece, because when you look at tags, like where do tags have to be hung? I always tell folks or ask folks that. In your program or process, where do you hang tags and what does it look like? If you've got, on top of a structure, you've got 9 switches, do you hang tags on all 9 of those switches, or have you built a system to hang tags? If you look at this, it says that you have to prohibit the operation of the disconnecting means. So if you're not hanging tags at everything, and I mean the difficulty, I mean we're in the real world, the difficulty of hanging 9 tags is tough. What I urge you to do is to ensure that you know that everybody on your system is hanging a tag in that exact location on this configuration, and this is what this means. I trained to this process. I trained to know what this tag means. You know, folks always tell me, well, you know, we just train folks not to remove a tag. Okay, I get that. But in this world, when you're talking about clearances, your tags are elevated. They're at a whole different level, and understanding how you apply tags throughout your system is one of the most important things you can do. I know I always go in the consulting world, I was telling Brent that earlier, but this is very, very important. Now, grounding. You know, there's some really good speakers that have come into ECOS and talked about grounding. Jim Vaughn, certainly grounding expert, but just knowing that the grounds that you are applying, you know, I've given you something pretty easy to look at here, but you know, the URD system, the underground system, all the equipment that we have out there now, are we appropriately applying our grounds? Do we have the right grounds? Ground clamps, all the things that go along with it, they look much different when you go from overhead to underground. Now, I always like to ask people this, well, if I'm a clearance holder, do I have to be on that job site? Well, let's look at this. Because when you look at, and keep in mind, OSHA's like bare bone basic, OSHA says that if somebody that's in charge of that clearance needs to leave the work site, so would they need to be on that work site? If they need to leave the work site, now the work site for a transmission operation might be tremendous, all right? But if they need to leave the work site, what do they have to do? They have to transfer their clearance, because now somebody needs to be in charge of the work. It's a very important piece, and I see utilities, sometimes large utilities, that have really loosened up on that process. So I would urge you to think through that a clearance holder holds a lot of clout. They have the responsibility for the work that's being done and all the folks that are underneath them. So, releasing a clearance, this is kind of the last piece that I want to talk about. Keep in mind, this is a very long process, but if you're going to release, now I've finished doing or completing my work, I'm going to start bringing up my power systems. I've still got a lot of people out there that are working under my clearance. There are certain methodic things that has to happen. When you have a system operator, they can help support this. When you don't have a system operator, then all the folks that are out in the field certainly have to have a methodic process. So I think it is very important to at least highlight this, talk about it. I'm sure that Jeremy's going to put up here exactly what this releasing and clearance is, but we're going to start out with this. We're going to make sure that we notify everybody that is working under the direction of that clearance holder that, hey, looks like we're getting ready to bring things back up, looks like we finished all of our work and we're ready to go. And then we're going to determine that everybody, we're going to go down our list. We're going to make sure that everybody that was on that job site is in the clear. They're out of this zone of protection. They have moved out, okay? We're going to ensure that all protective grounds have been removed, and that's why I see a lot of utilities hang flags, and typically we see green flags at grounds, so they won't forget that grounds are hung. Because if you catastrophically close on a ground, which we've had some clients do, it's not a pretty sight. This has happened in the generation world several different times, because generation folks don't have to apply temporary protective grounding like transmission distribution folks. It can sometimes get overlooked. All right, ensure that all protective grounds have been removed. Report the information to the system operator. Hey, system operator, now I'm ready to come back. I'm ready to bring all these systems back up, and I am in a position that I'm ready to release my clearance. So that system operator needs to hold a lot of information about what has been happening out there and ensure that information is getting back to them. So only the person that's in charge, so whoever calls in has got to be releasing it unless it's been transferred, and at that point they're the person that has been in charge. All right, so that's an important piece. Tagging goes along with this clearance. So it's kind of like a tandem process. It says no tags may be removed without the release of the associated clearance, but it's kind of goes hand in hand as to how you work that process. And then, of course, no re-energization can occur until methodically you've gone through the slide that I just talked you through. All these pieces and parts. Now, everybody says to me, Pam, hey, our industry does a really good job of that. I'm here to say that our industry can have some help with it, because we kind of get caught in a situation where we are just going through the motions. I'm going to take you back to my first slide. Keep in mind, this is checks and balances. Don't lose sight of that. Be methodic. Everybody within your utility, whether contractors coming in to work, and you contractors, that's why this particular program, when you go in to work for a utility, you will follow their program. Now, by the way, if their program's very lax, I want you to follow your program. Okay, make sure that you have the checks and balances in there. But if you're going into an organization that has a strong program in place, then they're going to require you to follow their program. And the reason why, everybody knows, because what you do affects people within the utility and the system. All right, we're most concerned about people. All right, so the system is down the road, but I will say we're concerned about people. So you guys are integrating together, and that's why you have to have a methodic process. Utilities have to know what contractors can do or perform on their systems. They have to have a methodic process of how they've trained them if they're going to allow them to switch and tag on their system and work in clearance work. So all these things have to be brought up. There's a methodic way of thinking about that, but don't forget your checks and balances. I thank you guys so much for today. Look forward to my next opportunity to come and speak with you. Thank you very much.